I'm Bob Uphues.
And I'm Brett McNeil.
And we are back in the back room at Luo's Peking House on Marion Street in downtown Oak Park. Thanks for checking in with us. And today's guest is, and I think we could call you a long-time Oak Park resident by this time.
That's true.
Currently the president of the Tusk Montgomery Philanthropies, which combats food insecurity in cities and states nationwide. And also you are building support for mobile voting and expansion of voting opportunities in elsewhere in the nation as well. And we'll get to that.
Okay.
Previously, you also were executive director of Bono's One campaign, which was an advocacy sort of lobbying group to fight poverty internationally and also prevent diseases. And for 4 years, most recently, before the work at Tusk Montgomery, you were the chief of staff for Jill Biden. So you were steps away from the White House at all times, and also a deputy assistant to President Obama. So we'll get to talk about that as well. So that's great. And so we'd like to welcome Sheila Nix to the podcast. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
This is great. So let's talk about what you're doing right now.
Okay.
And we will get to the other stuff. But especially in light of the last election that was held earlier, or I guess it was last week now, on Tuesday in Virginia, and the effect that voter suppression had on the 2016 election. Tell me about kind of what you're doing with Tusk Montgomery.
Sure. So, like you mentioned, there's kind of two pieces to the philanthropy. One is hunger prevention, and we run campaigns in different states. Focused a lot on breakfast after the bell, which is for kids going to school and giving them some options. If they can't get to the early breakfast program, they can do a grab-and-go type of program when they get to school. That just passed and was funded in Pennsylvania this year, and that just wrapped up because they had a lot of special sessions to get their budget done. And then next year, in Illinois, it happened a couple of years ago, but next year we're going to do New York, New Jersey, and Tennessee, as well as a little bit of work on similar issues in Arizona. So that's one half of what I do. And then the other half is mobile voting. So when I started working with Bradley, he was interested in trying to think about ways to expand democracy and to try to get more people involved in elections, in mostly because the way the system's set up right now, there's so many extremes. And so the politicians only respond to the people on the extremes, and nothing's getting done. There's generally some consensus in the country, even around complicated things like gun safety, but it's just that you can't set up. The Congress doesn't match like the middle opinions. And so one of the ideas, and there's a lot of ways that could change. There's some stuff around redistricting. There's some, but what we're focusing on, because Bradley's on the business side does a lot of technology and venture capital, is there a technological solution? So the idea is, could you vote on your phone? And it's really one of those funny topics. When I talk to people that have nothing to do with politics or elections, they're all for it. If I'm in an Uber and I mention it, the driver's always like, oh, that would be so great because I'm trying to get from job to job. If I could just vote without having to get to a polling place on a certain day. When you talk to people who are more in the industry, then there's more skepticism, I guess. And I think part of that is because change is always difficult, and people don't, if they are benefiting from the status quo, they don't necessarily want that to change, and especially in an unpredictable way. So we're focused really on, first of all, before we can do anything on the advocacy side, making sure that the technology and the security exists. Obviously, like a lot of the first question that people say, what about Russian hacking?
Yeah, right.
What about,
Right. I mean, especially in Illinois. We know that they hacked the Illinois voter registry.
So what you really have to look for is something that's more secure than even paper. Right now there's some tendency to say, let's go back to paper, but there's a lot of risks around that as well. So one of the things that we've been exploring is using blockchain technology. It makes sure that the vote is counted and it's auditable. So we've been working with an organization called Blockchain Trust Accelerator out of DC and the New America Foundation to start trying to put together a little bit of a group to work on this. There's two companies in the U.S. One's in Cleveland called Votum, and the other one's called Votes in Boston. And they are starting to develop it as a business. They've mostly done so far corporate elections, state party elections, but they're testing and they're working on it. So basically you have to make sure it's auditable. Then you have to make sure that it's me voting. So if I say it's me, how is that authenticated? That's the second challenge. That's moving along. I think, this isn't my expertise, but people are now using facial recognition on their iPhones. And I think there's ways that these companies have figured out to do the authentication. And then the last question is just around, is the phone system safe? And what are the safeguards in there? So getting that part done is the first step. We think that one of the things to do is to try a pilot in 2018, and one of the groups we're talking about is deployed military. They can't do the normal voting process anyway because they're not here. And especially if they're deployed to a war zone, like faxing things in, it's just not practical. So we're going to try to do in 2018 one state or county that would be willing to try the technology with their deployed military. And the deployed military and the military in general seem interested in this because the way it works now with all absentee ballots, they don't feel like their votes are counted.
Right.
They are, but they're not counted for the election night reporting.
Right.
What's interesting about that, I would just wonder what the appetite is among Republicans for increased access or ease of voting. It seems like zero. I think of Scott Walker in Wisconsin. They've purged the voter rolls in Milwaukee County. That goes a long way to explaining what happened last fall. But it's interesting that if the pilot is military, those are all Republican voters, right?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that we don't want it to turn into a partisan issue, because then if one side sees a benefit and the other side doesn't.
Isn't it? I mean, just on its face, isn't
I don't
expanded
think so.
access to voting a partisan issue in the current? I'm not accusing you of being a partisan. I'm saying, isn't it politicized?
It is politicized. There could be politicized issues around it, but if you look at a state, I think a lot of members of the Republican Party might, in their own primaries, like a broader voting base than just the people who get out and vote now. So I think across the board, there are political figures that would like to see a broader base of voters, because even in the primaries you tend to get the extremes, especially in the primaries, and so having people be able to vote more easily. And and the other thing is, this is a little bit down the road, but like our kids, like they do everything on their phone, and at a certain point, just to kind of keep participation going, I think you're going to want to try to adjust to what people are used to, and it's hard to imagine kids that are like 12 years old now that just like you can do everything on your phone. As you get to be into college, you can bank on your phone, and then all of a sudden, it's election day, and you have to go stand in line, and you might not have the right ID with you, you might be at the wrong polling place, so kind of trying to the mobile voting piece is a bit obviously a long-term project, so you have to make sure you have the technology and the security down. But also just to anticipate, what are going to be the behaviors of populations and across all demographics, and I don't anticipate also that mobile voting would be the only way you could vote.
Right.
At least initially, I think it'd be like you could do it this way or you could do it that way. One of the other groups that we've talked to a little bit is some people are working on doing more voter registration by your phone. That's already underway, and I think the other thing is as people get used to doing more voting-related things on their phone, then the move to actually wanting to just vote. Pretty soon they'll be like, wait, I can do this on the phone, I can do that on the phone, I just can't hit that last button. So,
I mean, we have a president right now who thinks that his inauguration was the most heavily attended of all time, and he's very fact-averse, and I just wonder, hopefully we don't live under his rule forever, but, is his line of thinking is sort of to disqualify fact without really understood and agreed upon security. I could see these voting records or the results being highly contested.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things about blockchain technology. It's, and I'm not a technology person, so I'm just like gathering information from people who know more than I do. But that system seems to be that it's auditable, and you can't hack it unless you would have like 3 million people in collusion or something. And so I think as that develops, and you can even use blockchain, we've been talking about this as another type of pilot to do election night reporting and try to make that more, because that just gets, if that got messed up, the election night reporting, and it didn't actually match the voting records, that could cause a lot of insecurity around the elections too. So there's a lot going on in the field.
Are you guys doing anything specifically in Illinois that might show up in the near future or mid-future?
Yeah, all of the elections, as you know, are all state and county based. So as we identify where we would want to do pilots, Illinois would be certainly in the mix.
It would seem like, at least under David Orr, he would be all for doing something. Now he is going to be, leaving the scene.
Yeah, so I think people think Chicago and Cook County could be a place that you could do it. And it'd be nice to do it kind of across a couple different states, some that seem to have more Democrats and some that have more Republicans. One state that's been kind of open to different things around voting, surprisingly, is Utah. And they did a kind of mobile voting for their caucus, the Republican caucus last time. So it's slow and it's starting to get out there. And it's also important not to do it until you know you have it right, because you only get a couple chances at this stuff.
Yeah.
If you do it and it blows
Screw up
up,
a major election,
then it's not
over.
it's not going to ever happen. So you have to take it one step at a time.
On the analog front, what are the security issues around paper? I mean, that seems like the simplest, or even the old
It's just
levers.
the transportation. Where if it seems to me that if anyone, basically any system we have could be hacked. I mean, what part of the thing that's helpful about the system, although it's complicated, is that because it's run at a county level and a state level, there isn't a single depository,
Right.
and that does help with this, with the security. But there's a lot of discussions around how do you move things? Where, what if these records don't match, even though you have paper, but you have this? And I think everyone remembers 2000,
Sure.
when we had
Right.
the butterfly ballots in Florida and different votes that weren't counted. So I just think going back to an old system and saying that's automatically going to be better isn't correct. It might be in some cases, or you might have a combination, but if the technology exists to make it easier to vote, to get more people to vote, and do it safely, then that seems like the way we would want to go.
Yeah. Well, speaking of voting, a year ago last week, you were watching election returns roll, and where did you watch that, and kind of what was going through the collective room as kind of that was unfolding?
Well, we had kind of an interesting weekend. I went with Dr. Biden and the Vice President I think we started the day in Florida, and we were just doing get out the vote kind of events. Was that? I'm trying to remember which states we went to, but we were definitely in Florida in the morning. And
I do my timelines as in what relation to the day where the Cubs won the World Series did this happen?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that euphoria died
Very
within a
quickly.
week.
I know. I always wondered if it was like some deal with the devil. We could have the Cubs win, but the price we paid was the election night
Right.
results. But so over the weekend we did kind of a swing, Pennsylvania and Florida, and then on election day. At the end of the day, we ended up the night before the election in Delaware, because the Bidens had to vote in the morning.
Okay.
So we spent the night before the election in Delaware and we traveled in Florida. Everyone felt good. I mean, I didn't hear anything that, people were concerned. Oh, and then the last event before we flew to Delaware was with Tim Kaine in Virginia. We were at George Mason University. It was a big rally, and then he was going on to Richmond to end his night, and then we went back to Delaware. Again, a lot of enthusiasm, and it seemed like people were feeling pretty upbeat. So on election day, I was then with Jill, and we drove. She voted, and then she had to teach that day because she's a full-time professor at Northern Virginia Community College, and she did that all the way through. So we were always doing our schedule around the teaching schedule. And so we had to drive, and she voted, and then I went to the office. And, it's just everyone was, those election days are always weird. There's nothing.
Nothing happens,
do
and
anything.
everything happens.
Yeah,
Right.
That's right. So at the end of the day, we were meeting some people from our staff, Jill and a couple other people, for dinner, and in DC, and then everyone's kind of looking at their phones, and somewhere around 8:00, I started feeling like this is not going as expected, and I had a couple different watch parties that I was going to stop by, and I just decided to go home.
Wow.
I just wanted to go home and actually be able to pay attention and watch it, and then actually just ended up staying there and doing a lot of conference calls and stuff. But it was quite unexpected and quite depressing in terms of hoping to have President Obama's legacy continue. So.
And then on Inauguration Day, you were on the rostrum.
Yes.
Where the change happened.
Yes.
Tell me
So
kind of what that was like.
Yeah, that was interesting. Because I went with the Bidens, and then we were going to go from there and take the train from Union Station up to Delaware. And it's really weird. It was really weird going in the office that morning because you knew this was the last time. Now, some of those transitions would happen no matter who won, but for us, it felt like, well, we're not coming back here
Yeah,
anytime
right.
soon. You know, if it had been Hillary Clinton, you might be back for, some meeting in a few weeks. But it was, it was a strange feeling. And
Are you saying that Pence hasn't reached out to Biden for
well, I think
consultations?
they actually might have some conversations, but
Yeah.
but I don't think, it was
Like
just,
how to
it was
turn
a-
on the lights or whatever?
It was a big change. We knew a big change was coming. And so then we went over to the White House, and it was, pretty surreal to have, President Trump and Melania Trump and the Pences walk in. And it's like, it's a good part of our democracy. That's like a huge change, right? And it does just happen without anybody getting hurt.
Yeah, there weren't tanks in the streets.
Yeah. So, me personally, I also had an idea that proved wrong, but I thought that Donald Trump, when he got into office, I thought that some of the election stuff was a little bit of an act to get elected, and that because
be
he's from
some
New York
correction.
and a businessman and stuff, that there'd be some kind of
Yeah.
moderation, and he sold himself as a deal maker, which would mean maybe some things would get done. So I've actually been surprised about the extreme nature of his presidency to date.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, then we went up to the Capitol, and it was strange. I was right by Rudy Giuliani, and it was like, what am I doing here?
What is
It's
he
like-
doing there?
So that was weird. And then we just left right afterwards and got
you
on
didn't
the train.
stick around to chit chat with
No,
anybody?
no, we didn't. No, we were ready to go. And we got on the train, and then there was a little kind of welcome back to Delaware reception for the Bidens, which was nice. And this is a little bit of a kind of not that interesting story, but to me, I had my whole day. I was like, okay, I'm going to try to make sure that I don't end up like sitting somewhere by myself, totally depressed at the end of the day. So my plan was I went up to this event in Delaware, and then my daughter goes to school in Philadelphia, and she was meeting me. She had done some advance work for the Bidens, and so she came up to the reception. And then we took a cab to downtown Philly. We're going to have dinner, and then my plan was like go right to the airport, get on the plane, get home, and then
Right.
be home at the end of the day. So after we had dinner, I dropped her back off at her apartment, and as we were going out to the airport, I got I think it was Southwest. I was like a 2-hour delay. So I got out to the Philadelphia airport. Like half the terminals were closed. I had to walk outside to another terminal to get in. And I was walking down this deserted hall, and I'm like, this is exactly what I didn't want to do. How am I here?
Desolation row.
Right.
Yeah, totally. So then the only good thing is then I got home. It was late. But the next day was the Women's March in
Right.
Chicago, and I wasn't even initially planning on, I wasn't sure I would attend. I didn't know what time I was going to get back and everything. But then my younger daughter was like, yeah, let's go. And actually, it turned out to be a really nice day.
It was a beautiful
and It was a
day.
beautiful
It was a
day.
huge turnout,
And it really,
and-
it did feel like, okay. I didn't feel quite as alone.
That's
So
great.
that was good.
I have one question about the collection of people on that dais. What did it smell like? Because I just, looking at it, it looked like it was a putrefaction.
I was cold.
Yeah.
I was
And it
definitely
wasn't
cold.
raining. I remember
No,
that.
it
There was
wasn't
zero
raining.
But so, again, you all just basically walked out the back door and away? Like just close the door and walk
Yeah,
out?
yeah. You just walk out and you're done. It's very sudden. So, for me, because I had worked on the Hill before and I worked on campaigns, both winning and losing. I'm a little used to that
Sure.
abrupt ending
Right.
nature. I felt really bad for the younger staff that they'd like a lot of them had their first job out of college working on the Obama campaign, and then you go 8 years through, and then boom.
The complete repudiation of
Complete
those 8 years.
repudiation,
Like,
and you're just
attempts
done.
to erase it.
Yeah,
Actively
yeah.
ongoing.
What's and so in the subsequent 12 months, or I guess 9 months
Yeah.
or 10 that after the inauguration, do you have it's like I'm wondering if you suffer flashbacks, is it still traumatic, or have you kind of moved on?
No, I think it's, you almost have to guard against becoming, there's so much stuff that's so bad all the time. I do think all the time if President Obama was still in office and he had done 1/100th of this thing, there would have been all this outcry, you know? And
Are
it's
you
like,
engaging in whataboutism right now?
But it's
but clearly.
It's-
Benghazi?
yeah.
Holy smokes.
I know.
They're still talking about it.
Yeah, it's really strange how, just the whole protocol of the presidency, the kind of language, the respect
Right.
in the past, I felt like the former presidents, including Bush, would almost go out of their way to be congenial to the other side, and especially in tragedies and things, and that's just not. We just don't have that anymore, and so the norms have changed so much that it's sometimes I just have to stop. You almost start getting used to it though, which is the scary part because it's like something every day, and then it's like, wait a second, like this is really insane, and I'm hoping that so far, but this could change. So far, like there hasn't been any really major legislation that's passed, and maybe that will happen with the taxes, but. It gives me some hope that if somebody new got in 2020, that most of the stuff that's happened to date could be undone, other than the courts, which are a real problem. And I don't know if you saw yesterday,
this guy who was just approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Yeah, that's crazy, and I do think there's a responsibility in the Senate to kind of push back on some of that on both sides. Like you just have to say, like, this person is not qualified, and our job is to advise.
Right.
So I don't
There's
know.
been
if
very little willingness to do that, though. I mean, they're really trying to figure out a power party.
Yeah.
And they're stumbling on that front.
I
But
think
that is Bannon's project. Is like truly
well, the
hijacking
Republicans
power.
are worried that the mainstream Republicans are worried that if they don't go along with some of the stuff, then they get a primary and then they lose.
Right.
So it's
back to your point about expanding the voter bases in those
Yeah,
primaries.
that would help
but
them,
boy,
Yeah.
maybe if it's easier to vote, people will do it because the most motivated are the most radicalized.
Yeah.
And we
And
run
especially
to
now,
this
it's like they're worried about getting primaried, but at the same time, the entire kind of underpinning of government, from the State Department to the EPA to pick your
Right.
pick your
I know.
department. I mean,
It's just-
how to the next person, hopefully, has to rebuild that entire infrastructure
Yeah.
almost from scratch
Yeah.
because it's been eviscerated.
But that is the project, isn't it? I mean, isn't it
sure
to
it
drown
is.
it in the bathtub?
Well,
and
yeah.
to cap, whatever the
Yeah.
analogy is. And Pruitt is probably, I think, he's really the poster boy of success. He's really the guy
Just shutting
who's
it down.
picked up the football
Yeah.
and just run with it.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's a difficult
Yeah.
situation, and it's it doesn't seem like any. Last week was a little bit hopeful around the elections in Virginia, just to see more people turning out, and
Right.
that everyone was all of a sudden predicting that Gillespie was going to win, and he didn't.
Right.
It wasn't even really close. So,
But then we have this election that is pending in Alabama,
Right.
And
Yeah.
now there is some thought that there might be an attempt to postpone the election
I
because
know.
it might
And
be an
kinda
election they can't win.
Right. I know.
And,
I know.
and that's
I did
you're-
see the governor said he wasn't going to do that.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Because,
because
I hadn't
that's
seen a
going
statement
down
about
path
that.
Okay,
in a
but
really-
then isn't Moore going to win?
Well, he might.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then what?
I mean, you have some Republican officials saying basically anybody but a Democrat,
Yeah.
even
Well, I mean-
if they had hard evidence that
This is how Trump
this
was
is-
elected, frankly.
yeah,
I mean,
right.
anybody but Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Again and again and
Yeah.
again. They're still saying it.
Yeah. No, it is.
I don't know how much we can really cover this erosion of presidential norms. It was interesting to see Obama at Cook County work in the
Yeah.
crowd. He's
Yeah.
very charismatic. But Trump seems intent on suffocating us. He draws all oxygen
Yeah, no, it's very
out
difficult.
of room
even
to self.
And you in your own businesses, you see this. Like if you're trying to get a story out about something, just ignore. It's like very difficult because every day there's something huge going
Correct.
on around Trump, and just like the normal things that people might be interested in aren't getting no coverage anymore.
right. Yeah.
So,
Well, let's go back to your time in and around the White House. One thing I always wondered, and I don't know if you guys were fans of the TV show Veep. And watched it. So how real or how accurate is the TV show in relation to
Yeah.
what actually happens?
Well, people always asked about different shows, Scandal, House of Cards, all of that. And I always, my opinion is Veep is actually the most accurate.
Yeah.
It's exaggerated, but the personalities, the type of people, that part is true. There was one episode that Julia Dreyfus was still VP. She was going to a yogurt store, ice cream store or something, and she was trying to figure out what flavor to order. And there was like a whole meeting about it. I was like, yeah, that could happen, like it probably wouldn't at that level, but like some of that, day-to-day stuff, and then people being concerned about like who's in the car and who's, like that stuff's, that's just more real.
We had our, we actually had a discussion in reality about the kind of mustard that the president liked on a hamburger. So I suppose that isn't
They
far-fetched.
know people are going to look
right.
at that. Yeah. A couple years ago, I did a thing at the Institute of Politics and at University of Chicago, and I did it with the actress that plays the chief of staff on Veep, and then we watched an episode of a show and kind of had a discussion about it and stuff. It was really fun. But I think they do a reasonably good job of research and making sure that like the little things are right, and but yeah, I think that tends to be more realistic than like the big drama, schemes that go on some of those other shows,
House of Cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The late great.
Yeah.
What goes on behind the scenes that people, at least up until this, this past year, I think people have an expectation that, the people, in the offices having the discussions know exactly, what they're going to do. They've got it all planned out. And what actually happens, behind the scenes, and, obviously we're dealing with human beings here. So, before Obama was president, there wasn't a class that he could take on, this is how you succeed as a president.
You have to learn on the job
a little bit. What is it like behind the scenes?
Well, some of it that's interesting, I think, is, especially on the trips, on the foreign trips, we have to do a lot of advance work. And so usually you have a team that goes out a couple weeks in advance, and they figure out, because as soon as something goes wrong, it's like, oh my God, how did you let that happen? So it's necessary to go out and really almost walk through every single little detail of a day, of a trip. Like here's like a restaurant, if the Bidens or the Obamas were going to a restaurant, you had to go through a vetting process to make sure there was nothing with the restaurant, the owner of the restaurant, because
Sure.
people assume that, if you go, if you're like, oh, well, you went to a restaurant and the owner hadn't paid taxes.
You're supporting a tax dodger.
Yeah. And so just making sure to the extent possible, and you can, there's always some stuff that's going to get missed that you have to do. Now on the policy side, you have the Domestic Policy Council, and they, feed up, so the agencies feed up. And I thought under the Obama administration, they did a good job of getting all the input from the agencies and then, making a decision and presenting options to the president and the vice president. But, but then there's always more than one point of view on things. And so you have to, at a certain point, they just have to decide which one they want to do. But that all seemed to work pretty well in the Obama administration. But there were, there's, with Jill, when she had kind of three priority areas: community college, the policy around community college, and then we did on the international front, women and girls, and and then she did some work just in general on education, like teacher appreciation, and so that's three. And I said there was three, but there's a couple more, but. But we did a strategic plan every year to figure out how do we advance these things. And in the in her office, because we weren't able to introduce legislation or do rulemaking. I mean, that was the president. We had to figure out other ways to feed into the White House process, as well as use her platform to raise and to advocate sometimes. And one of the things that was really interesting is when the president decided to support and push free community college.
Right.
She was she always says you're in a perfect place because she's a community college professor. She taught all the way through the administration.
Did she do writing? Is that what?
Yeah, writing. Okay. Yeah. So when we traveled, she always had a bag of papers with her. I mean, it was just like
life of a teacher.
Yeah,
lady.
and she was like, that's right. And she also would be like, I need to, especially when the research papers were due, she'd be like, she knew I have to do 9 a day, or I'm not going to get caught up, and so that had to get worked into our schedule. We got into a town.
It's so interesting because the current administration rolling back, rolling back community college focus in favor of for-profits.
Yeah.
This is DeVos's actual pocketbook issue.
Yeah.
And you mentioned having watched our episode with the bird class,
Triton.
but that's Triton College.
Yeah.
We are, this show, this podcast is a very strong supporter of community colleges, but is Jill Biden, Dr. Biden, is this an issue that she has like an ongoing platform to
there
sort
was
of promote?
an organization put together called America's College Promise, and it's to advocate for continued expansion of free community college. So she's the head of the board of that, and that continues to do work. And they've actually, because it can be done at a state or a local level, there's still been some successes around free community college, even without the federal funding. And the first state that did it statewide was Tennessee under the current Republican governor, Haslam. So there's a lot of good data on how it can improve a state's economy and how, it's really a win-win. So it is it's worth to keep fighting for. We went down to Nashville and visited at a school. It was such an interesting high school. They had a combination of, they had like a little credit union in there and kind of a mock hospital. And so the kids that had ideas about what they might want to do were able to use even some of their high school to get a head start on the training. And then almost every kid was taking advantage of the free community college, and it almost became like an extension of their high school because they were staying at home, they were staying in the same community, and then I think then when they got 2 years in, then it seemed like more like, okay, yeah, actually maybe we'll have a chance
stick with
of
this
that it doesn't seem so difficult as it was. And they had a mentoring program at the high school, and I was really, really impressed with it because the kids seemed, and the governor said something interesting. He said, when he first passed it, people said, well, if everyone knows they can just go for free, doesn't that mean they won't work hard in high school? And he said, no, it's just the opposite. They know they're going to college, and so they're working hard because they want to be successful there. So
I don't understand the fear of someone having access to education.
I know.
Like they're getting something.
Well, if
I
I had
that somehow it's
They're getting
taking
something I
something
didn't-
away
I know.
from you.
I know.
either I paid
Like it's
for
this
it,
zero
Yeah.
sum
and you did
thing.
it.
Yes, right. Instead of saying like, if we have more young people educated and skilled, it's going to be better for all of us. I mean, I think that, at a certain point, people are going to be like, how is Social Security isn't going to be able to keep going unless we have younger workers in the workforce,
Right.
So it's in everyone's interest to have people educated and be able to have skilled jobs.
Now, I will say the Democratic mayor of Chicago has a problem with his city colleges and the fake numbers. Obviously, the BGA was all over that. That's a little cynical, right?
Yeah,
But-
I haven't.
But
I don't
very
know the
interesting
details.
that it's a
Yeah.
Republican governor in Tennessee
Yeah,
who's
yeah,
expanding this.
Yeah. No, he's done a lot and put a lot into it. It started as a philanthropy and just part of the state, and then they ended up expanding it. And in some places it's more government funding, some it's business community, some it's philanthropy. But it really makes a difference, I think, for kids. And sometimes people say, well, community college doesn't cost that much anyway. But it's not only the money, and that's the money can make a big difference, but it's just the expectation and the expectation that there's something that you can keep going to
Sure.
after your 12th year of high school.
And supporting them and getting
Yeah.
credits that actually transfer
Yeah,
to a
yeah,
four-year degree,
exactly,
that sort
exactly.
of thing. Well, I really hope that doesn't evaporate and blow
Yeah.
away in our current climate. And you asked, what is the zero-sum politics? Well, I mean, this is the house organs of the current sort of ideological sort of firmament of the right, the Mercers. They want what's theirs,
Yeah.
and they're going to take it and they'll park it in the Caymans or whatever, or not. But it really is an issue of like, I'm not going to give you something that's mine.
Right. Yeah.
So, and that's partly the big attack on the federal government, right? That nobody wants taxes, nobody wants redistribution. Anyway, I do want to. Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
in it, we haven't talked about this
It's your
at all,
podcast.
but you also you worked for Blagojevich.
Yeah.
You have this. You go back to the were you a deputy
Governor.
And your current business partner was a deputy. Was he a deputy governor as well?
Before me, yeah.
Anyway, so Blagojevich, water under the bridge there. But it's interesting that you ended up with Obama because Blago clearly imagined himself to have an outcome like what
Right.
Barack Obama accomplished. But you've been around. There was a lot of cynicism in Blago, but there were also at the outset there were like ideas or like hopes.
Right.
And then the Obama administration was clearly built on ideas and a lot of hope, pilloried for that. And now we're in a new era, I think. And I don't know if I have a real question here, but how do you reconcile coming out of, you talked about the 8 years, kind of an era of like expansion of rights or expansion of national
Optimism
conversation,
sometimes, yeah.
and to this revanchist position that we find ourselves in. What do you make of it?
I feel like without having looked at a lot of social science data, I feel like there must have been some deep-seated resentment among some voters over the last 8 years, that they felt like they weren't part of that discussion. They weren't part of they were left behind. I mean, there seems to have been some sort of anger and resentment that, and I don't know why. I mean, in some cases, I guess, people lost their jobs and feel like whatever was being discussed worked for them, or, but obviously some people didn't feel the same optimism that others did, and now, they've all of a sudden come out of the woodwork, and I'd be interested to understand that better, because I think, every administration would like to feel like they're doing the best they can for everyone, but some people didn't feel that way. And I feel like maybe Trump gives, he gives permission for people to be more angry and hateful than some of that people may have felt, but they didn't feel like it was okay to communicate that way. And I don't know. It's, it seems just right now like we're in a place where people feel like it's okay to just be really hateful and nasty. And
so I know I'm not asking you to solve the Democrats' problem, but you were at the Women's March. Right now, some gains out of those election results last week, but what is the Democratic Party, because there's really no other way here right now, what do they need to do to turn this around?
Yeah.
And to
they
really
could stop relitigating the 2016 primaries. They could stop doing that. That would be a start.
Okay.
I think if everyone stopped that, we'd be in a better shape.
Yeah.
It's over.
But clearly, that party needs to expand its reach.
I think it needs to. I think one of the lessons that came up, and looking back on the presidential election and some subsequent elections, is that the Democrats can't just be anti-Trump. You have to have your own ideas, and I think you only win when you have a message of what you're going to do forward, and it's not all, the other guy's bad. And clearly a lot of people believe the other guy's bad, but I think it's about what are we going to do, to keep community college going? What are we going to do around healthcare? What are we going to do? And I think having some policy positions that try to bring people together, I think would be a good idea. And I think you're right, Bob, that you just have to stop going back over. I feel like Hillary Clinton's vilified by everybody. Even some primary voters, the president. And I think we do need to move forward and stop looking back.
The other thing is, it seems to me that the Democratic message gets complicated.
Yeah.
Where it's, I don't know why they just can't have a message that basically centers around, we believe that there's an opportunity for government to improve people's lives.
Yeah.
And those
and we want to do that in partnership with them. Yeah.
And I don't know why that simple message gets fractured.
So complicated. Yeah.
I'm not sure. But it's weird. Let me change the subject a little bit. What's Bono like?
Oh, he's great.
Bono.
I have a lot of fun.
You mean the Lithuanian mall owner?
Correct.
He's very knowledgeable on we really focused on advocacy around sub-Saharan Africa, and he's very, very knowledgeable. And we would do visits up to Capitol Hill, and he would go into the history of what had happened and how it could be prevented, and at a level that I think most members of Congress were pretty shocked. He's not like
in terms of his policy wonkiness.
Policy, just deep understanding and involvement for a long time. But he's also, from my perspective, was very easy to work with. And
how closely did you work with him?
So he would come in. He had obviously another career.
Yeah, right.
But he was when I interviewed for the job. He was my last interview. So he was actually part of hiring the senior people there. And then I'd say he'd come to D.C. a couple of times a year. We would do Hill visits and administration visits. And then I'd probably see him. Maybe he would come with us on an Africa trip for, political influencers or something, maybe once a year on that. So, and he would participate by phone and things like that. But so, yeah, he was a big part of the organization. The first time I went up to Capitol Hill with him, we had a pretty good series of meetings, and we got in the car, to go back to the office. And, when I had worked for other politicians in the past, including Rod, the second you got in the car, it was like, here's everything that went wrong. Like, we should have done this, we should have done that. So, I sort of had that expectation, like, it was going to be like, hey, okay. Like, but instead he was like, Sheila. And I was like, yeah, here comes the,
here comes the
here comes the
postmortem.
complaints.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
The autopsy.
And he's like, thanks. Like, that was a great job. Thank you. Like, I thought that was really useful. And I was just like, okay. So he was also appreciative of the work that people put into it. And even after I left there, it was always nice to see him at different events. And
And you got to stay in his house. One of his houses, at least, right?
Yeah.
Is this
yeah.
Ireland or something? Or I presume he has homes
I'm
on
sure
every
he's got-
continent.
he's got 'em all over
Well,
the
we
place.
did the board meeting for one of the years. We did it at the actual meeting was at the studio, the recording studio, and then they had a lunch at Bono's house in Dublin, and
Okay.
and that was, it was nice and they're very hospitable people.
So that job took you traveling.
Mostly in Africa.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, some in the United States because I was the U.S. executive director, and going out to take a look at some of the colleges where we had chapters in different regions, but also then probably 2 or 3 times a year we went to Africa, and so our goal on those trips were to show that some investments, the U.S. investments in foreign aid, were working, and you could, you go to a clinic and see how mother-to-child transmission of HIV had really, slowed down and about come to a stop because of investments in PEPFAR and the Global Fund and other things. And so our goal was to bring people, to let them see it firsthand, and I think that's the way to do it, because it's not that every problem is solved. It clearly isn't, but it does show you that there are ways. People sometimes are like, "Oh, there's nothing you can do. It's hopeless." And I was like, no, there's a lot you can do, and here's how you can make a small investment in HIV drugs and change the lives of all these people, including children. And I think that that was really a meaningful part of the job.
Was he part of what was that big megastar? USA for Africa.
It was like We Are the World.
We Are the World.
Yeah,
Is that how
I think
he got into Africa?
I think that was before I got there, but that was one of the first kind of public, I think. It was around the famine in Ethiopia, way back. So, that was, I think, part of him and Bob Geldof and others that was kind of their first big intervention there.
Mm-hmm.
The One. What's the organization called?
One.
Just
yeah.
one?
Yeah.
For the song?
Well, I think it was formed by a coalition of different nonprofits,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it
Yeah.
was like a dozen or so.
Right.
I
Eventually,
think the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is really critical in
They
funding
are,
that.
they're a big funder of the One campaign. Initially, there was an organization called DATA that it stood for AIDS transfer. I can't remember. It was the acronym was DATA, but it was also Data Africa Transparency or something, but it initially started on debt relief. And it was around that Jubilee and trying to have, because at the time all these African countries owed all this money,
Sure.
and they had no way of paying it, and it was just like they couldn't, So anyway, there was a debt relief piece that happened. That was kind of the first thing, and Data as an organization was mostly focused on policy development and high level lobbying. And then the One piece of it came along to do the grassroots advocacy, to involve regular, average people in it, and then have them become involved and lobby their member of Congress from the local level and do more of a grassroots feel. And then eventually the two organizations merged together into what's One now.
Okay.
So, for people watching at home, how did you do all this? How the trajectory of you being a deputy governor and then working for Bono and traveling around Africa?
Yeah,
How did you come to have these jobs?
I know
and
people
sort
always
of
ask me what my
intersect with-
plan was. I'm like,
It's like,
no, there's no plan.
It's like, there's no newspaper classified ad for
Right.
executive director for the One.
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
right.
It's in the back of the reader.
Yeah. No, I started out, it's funny because now I'm on the board of Creighton University, where I went for my undergrad in Omaha. And I was just out there last week for a board meeting, and I was talking to some students. And I was an accounting major in undergrad. And so...
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So,
Not a lot of accounting
I
majors,
know.
I'm guessing, traveled
Who
this
then went to
path.
U of C Law School.
Yeah.
So-
So I started off, I worked in an accounting firm for a couple of years, and then I went to University of Chicago for law school, and then went out to D.C., and I worked at a firm, Arnold and Porter. It's like a big DC firm, but I kind of chose them because they had a tradition of people working in government and kind of going back and forth. And I was interested in that, and so when I'd been at Arnold and Porter a couple of years, and one of the partners I worked with asked me if I wanted to take a leave of absence and be in-house counsel on Bob Kerrey's presidential campaign in 1992. And Bob had been governor of Nebraska when I was in college, so I liked him and was familiar with him. And so I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. And then that was kind of the big transition time. Like, even though I went in as legal counsel and I did a lot of legal work, it also on a campaign you just end up doing everything, because they're always short-staffed. And so after that was over, I did go back to Arnold and Porter for a couple of months, but I was like, oh, I've got to do something more interactive, And so then I ended up getting hired in Bob Kerrey's Senate office to do healthcare legislation, and that was the first go-round of healthcare. So I have a long interest in healthcare policy and hoping that we can kind of keep what we have right now. But then I worked for Bob for 7 years in the Senate, and then when he retired, I was Bill Nelson from Florida's first chief of staff. And so I had about just 10 or 11 years in the Senate, and then came back to Chicago, where I'm from, and my husband's from, and we wanted to come back for a while, and that's when I worked in the governor's office.
Okay.
So, so it's all, I've done a lot of, seminars and mentoring for younger women that are starting off in their career, and there's always question like, how did you get to do that and stuff. And in a lot of ways, it's like, just say yes to the opportunities that come to you, because that's, sometimes you have to take a little bit of a risk, and just be like, I have this job that I generally like, that pays okay and is safe. But if something appeals to you, like, take a chance on it and try it, because, now that my kids are starting to get into college and looking for jobs, and there's so much stress around what are they going to do? It's like, you have so long to work. You really do. Like, when now I realize that. You don't realize that when you're 21, but, you have a long time to work. And so if you try something and it doesn't work, that's okay. I mean, I started off as an accountant, and I didn't dislike it. I just knew I didn't want to be doing that for the rest of my career. But the other thing about it is, you can always take something positive from everything you did, because no matter where I go, what kind of organization I'm involved in, there's a budget. And so you have to be comfortable with numbers. And having that experience, when I was young, it's like, okay, that doesn't intimidate me, and that's something that I can use. So you never know what you might get from something, too, even on the things that don't work out the exact way you think they will.
When you came back to work on Blagojevich's campaign, did you imagine that he had a national trajectory? Was that part of the thinking,
no,
or you were, sounds like you were in Chicago because you wanted to be
I just wanted to be, yeah. I mean, to be
you
honest,
had spent a lot of time in Washington,
yes,
D.C.
Yes, I did.
I mean, you and Jim were out there for
13 years. Yeah. So we just wanted to try being in Chicago, and I knew some people that were working for Rod that I'd worked with in the Senate and stuff. Okay. So it wasn't that I necessarily thought he had a trajectory nationally. I did think it'd be interesting to work in a governor's office, because I'd always been on the legislative side until that point. And I did feel like, at the beginning, too, we were able to get a lot of stuff done around children's health care and open road tolling. And there were some positives that came from it. Yeah, people forget that.
I will always be grateful to Blagojevic for open road tolling. Oh, my God,
yeah.
I no longer need to roll a dime somewhere.
I know, it's true.
Or Necco wafers used to work.
I didn't. Well, I didn't get that advance. Sorry. That's great.
So 13 years in D.C., we were talking before we taped, but sleepy town. I mean, that's I've been spending some time out there for work, and it's nice. I like it.
It doesn't go really late at night or anything. Yeah, like if you're in New York, you're like, there's always like a lot of activity, and DC's a little bit quieter, but.
We did make it to Comet Ping Pong Pizza.
Oh yeah.
We made a point of visiting.
Made a point to go.
We looked in the back rooms, made sure nothing was
going on.
That's good.
Yeah, no, I think DC's, like that 14th Street corridor. I mean, it changed.
Really
it changed quite a bit from the time I moved there until recently, and I do think that it becomes it's a little bit of a transient city too, and maybe that's part of why it doesn't feel the same as other places. But we had a lot of friends there, and it is a place where I think it's a great place for young people to go when they first, if they're interested in that kind of work, to get there, because there's a lot of opportunity, and people are in a mode of wanting to, know other people and have friends and stuff. I mean, one thing I did notice when I came back to Chicago is that so many people are from here and have a big family here and have stayed here. I mean, myself included. And so there's not the openness. It's not
interesting.
Yeah, there's not the openness to say like, oh, you're new here, like let's go get a drink. It's like,
I didn't
well,
meet you in grade school.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah, there's a clannishness.
Yeah.
for sure.
clannishness, or like people just don't have time for more friends
Yeah.
because they have their current friends, they have their high school friends, they have their grade school friends, they have their family, they have, and so that is one thing I always liked about DC is that you could end up with, really good
Adult
friends
friends
because
that you
and
that's a good
opportunities to
point.
meet them. So.
What are you doing in Oak Park? I mean, did you grow up here, or did you
No,
choose
I,
this community?
yeah,
and since
we-
we're talking about this for the Wednesday Journal, I just
Yeah,
curious to know.
no, we moved to Oak Park when we came back to Chicago in 2013, and my sister lived in Oak Park, and my sister-in-law lives in River Forest,
Okay,
and
so-
so we figured, one of the main reasons we were coming back is for like our kids to know
Right.
their cousins
It's
and
kind
stuff.
of a midway point between Jim's family.
Yeah, and my
and yours.
in-laws were in
Yeah.
Western Springs, and my parents are in Palatine.
Yeah.
And Oak Park's just like it's a nice combination of like it's not too suburban feeling, and you can still take the L downtown, but yet you have like parks and schools and stuff for the kids. So
But
it's-
you've never. It seems like you've never really had the urge to like insert yourself locally the way you have nationally here.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know. I don't. It's not intentional, but
No,
it,
yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose
yeah.
it's good that there's a place where you can go where you're.
I'm
You're
just
not- you're not
home.
having that
yeah,
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's right. I did an interview with Chicago Magazine
Saw that.
a few months ago, and one of the questions that Carol asked me was like, she's like, well, if we're doing all this stuff, I don't know if this is a positive or negative. She's like, you don't seem very high profile. And I said, well, I'm like,
That
I'm,
backhanded compliment.
yeah, maybe. But I was like, I'm where I want to be.
Right.
I want to have time where I'm just me, and I don't want to have to always be like responsible for,
Right.
having the answers to everything. And I also think sometimes you have to be careful, like in a lot of these jobs, to do your job well. It isn't about you it's not about you personally. It's about, what the message is of the candidate or the elected official or or Bono. And so I don't know. Sometimes I think there's a balance there between, being a high profile and, just doing your job,
Was there ever a time, or are there times when you had thought, I could run for
this.
something, I could win election to office and be the big cheese? I
Yeah, I
do
feel
this.
like sometimes I might know too much to want to do that because I just know how much work it is,
Right.
and it's like the fundraising requirements. I'm not really great at asking people for things and raising money, so I think that would be a skill that I know I don't have. At times, especially in the Senate, I thought it would be interesting to be a senator. I mean, I think that part of it, I think I would like some of the jobs, but I don't know that I'd like the process to get there. So, but it's interesting because after the election last year, there's a lot of people who worked for Obama that are actually running for things
Sure.
now, and there is, you do think sometimes like, well, if I'm going to complain about a lot of things, maybe I need to, just step out a
up
little bit. So, maybe someday if the timing was right.
On that point, I mean, so you're back in Illinois. What do you think about the future of the state? I mean, we have manifold problems
Yeah.
financially, and we also
Yeah.
have kind of a leadership problem. I mean, obviously right at the top, but
Yeah.
So prognosis, and then are there some candidates that interest you? Or
I mean, I thought it was one thing that was really interesting is how many candidates jumped into the attorney general
Sure.
race,
Yeah.
and that was interesting, and I know and like several of them, so I was like, wow, I was kind of surprised by the interest in that. I think that I think it's been it's I don't know what the issue is here in terms of the structure and why. I mean, I really feel like a lot of the problems here are because bills didn't get paid many, many years ago around the pensions. And that's a really, really difficult problem to solve right now. And I think that would take people who are really, really almost willing to put their own careers on the line to sit down and solve that. And I don't know. I know it's super difficult, and you have to bring in a lot of different parties. And I wasn't here when Rauner was elected, but I had an idea that he might be that type of person that was like more coming from the business side, so that side would trust him. And but it seemed to start off on a completely opposite direction,
Well,
and that wasn't.
It was basically, here are my demands. meet
My
them.
way or the highway.
Yeah. So that but could there ever be a candidate like that? I think so. I think I like several of the candidates that are running on the Democratic side. I'm not personally picking one at this point. In full disclosure, my son works on Chris Kennedy's campaign, but I also have a lot of friends and former colleagues that are working for J.B. Pritzker. So, my thing is like, great. I think they'd both be good, and they'd both be good general election candidates, and they both have interesting ideas. So that's good, and I'm glad there's people stepping up to run in this circumstance, because I think Illinois does have a lot of issues, and it would be a very, very difficult job.
And what about outside of our state, nationally? I mean, one of the big questions is there a candidate that can carry enough votes, really, to beat Trump, who's going to have 38 or 40%?
Yeah.
He's going to bank
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
And if the Dems split, he wins. But is there a unity candidate or a unifying candidate, a sleeper agent that we just haven't? That isn't
Well, there could
obvious
always
to
be
all of us
that,
at
right?
this point. I
Because
don't know.
that's how Barack Obama was.
Correct.
A couple of years ahead
Comet,
of time,
right.
nobody knew about him, right? So you don't know. And one of the things that I think is interesting, and across all levels of politics, is some people get into office because they took a big risk to run for something that wasn't safe, and then circumstances broke their way. And so I've always admired people who get into races, and even if the odds don't look good, or even if it seems like, well, the safe candidate is going to win. Chris Coons from Delaware is one of those. Do you remember he was? No one wanted to run for governor, Senate in Delaware, because Mike Castle, who had been the congressman, and it's just one congressman, so he had run statewide, was going to run for Senate, and he seemed like a shoo-in, and people liked him. And then he ended up getting primaried by that woman who, I forget her name, but she wasn't a witch.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Christine, yeah.
Something.
So she wins the primary, and then all of a sudden now Chris Coons is
a
the
race.
Democrat. So it's a race, right? So you can't always really tell until people get in. I think, I was working for Vice President Biden when he was thinking about this race, and he had obviously a tragedy in his family that made it just not feasible. And, there's been a lot of people that have talked to him about running, and I think that's something he's thinking about. I think he'd be an excellent president, but I think it's also way too soon to tell, and even though it'll probably start picking up after the midterms, that's still over a year away, and how much, just
Sure.
given everything that's been happening,
Yeah.
you just don't know what the landscape's going to look like.
That's for sure.
That is true. I mean, the next election could be
Something different that we're not even thinking about right now.
It may also be held under martial law. Who knows?
Anyway,
on that.
Brett's always looking on the bright side. So, by the way, and I guess maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, since you brought up disclosure, I should also disclose that Jim's husband, or Sheila's husband, Jim, was the best man at my wedding. So we
personal
We've known each other for a long
my
time.
my one and only government job I met Jim at. We were lifeguards at Cermak Pool for the Cook County Forest Preserve District. So
How'd you get that job, Bob?
I had to have a clout call it in. I did. The Berwyn Township committeeman at the time, put in
so
a word
funny.
for me. But I could also swim and save people, so that also helped.
You were qualified.
Yes, so I was
You and
qualified
Ronald
for the
Reagan.
job.
That's great. That's great. Well, Sheila, thank you very much for
Yeah, this
coming
was
to
really
Blue
fun.
O's.
Thank you.
Great, thanks
Sounds
a lot.
great. Thank you.